Hi, this is Lee Furseth from the Headwater Science Center, and boy, do we have a show for you today. We have a guest presenter, so I'm very excited to introduce our guest. But before I do that, let's just make a few announcements. Here's the most exciting one. Okay, they're all exciting. Here's an exciting one. I'm taking my mask off. I'm fully vaccinated, and being fully vaccinated now means I feel very safe as I take my mask down. Our presenter is fully vaccinated too, so you'll notice he doesn't have a mask on, and we don't have any guests or visitors here today. So, tomorrow, June 4th, we are 7 days a week. That's Friday, June 4th. We're 7 days a week starting tomorrow. From this time forward all the way around to Labor Day, you can just go, is the Science Center open today or not open today? And you can just forget that whole question and come to the Science Center. So it's Monday through Saturday, 9:30 to 5. Sundays is 1 to 5. So that's our very exciting announcements. If you know about this show, you know that we received a very generous donation from Beltrami Electric Cooperative, and they are underwriting our shows. And now we do these shows every single day, 3:30. We call them after-school STEM shows, which no longer exists. So maybe we'll drop the after-school and just call them STEM shows. So here's your STEM show for today. We're going to talk about fish and the guest presenter. Listen to this, Joe Furseth. Now, if you were listening carefully, you're going, hey, you guys share the same last name? Yes, we do. That's not the only thing we share. We share a similar relative. His father, that would be my brother. That makes me an uncle. So this is Joe Furseth, and thanks for being here. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Uncle Lee.
Tell them about yourself and all that kind of stuff, and maybe why you left the H off your shirt, because that's not how we spell Furseth and all that kind of stuff.
Sure, yeah. That was the first thing Uncle Lee said to me when I came up today. He said, 1914, what's that about? Well, Furseth is actually a hockey team in Oslo, and they were established in 1914. So I figured this was a perfect shirt to wear today. So I do have a few fish to clean today. Let's get one out right away. I live on a lake. I live on Turtle River Lake, which doesn't have any trout in it, but my uncle said we need trout for the presentation today. So I got up early this morning and I went and I caught a few rainbow trout. That's what we have here. They are stocked. They're not native to Minnesota. They're stocked in a lot of lakes and rivers around northern Minnesota here. So I actually caught this one in a lake, and then that was kind of it. There were no more biting, and I wanted to have a few more, so I went over to a river and caught a few more. It'll be kind of interesting to see just the difference between the fish, how they look, and then maybe the contents of their stomach will be different too. So in addition to that, I have a fish that's fairly common around here called a black crappie. And I thought it was interesting to have these two fish together because they are extremely different looking. They have pretty different anatomy, and the meat is very different as well. So it'll be kind of interesting to see when we clean them how they differ on the inside as well as the outside. On the lake this morning, I fished with a Rapala, which is a lure that most people are probably familiar with. It's a crankbait that's meant to look like a little fish. I just trolled that around the lake, and that's how I caught this one. But when I went to the river, I switched to fly fishing. I brought some flies to show you today. They range vastly in size here. And there's two basic categories of flies. There's dry flies and there's wet flies, and it's just what it sounds like. A dry fly is meant to float on the surface and stay dry. Fish comes to the top and eats it, and a wet fly is meant to sink. Within those categories, within the wet flies, there's flies called streamers, which are meant to swim through the water, meant to mimic a leech or a minnow, and then there's nymphs, which are meant to mimic insects that are just tumbling under the water column there. So the trout that I caught on the river, I actually caught a few on streamers, and that's because I was fishing downstream. So as I was walking with the current, I would cast into the current and let it pull my fly down, and then I would strip it back, and the fish would bite as it was moving. When I got down far enough, I turned around and put on a nymph, fished back up, so I'd cast upstream, and the current would pull the fly back down toward me. And in that case, you just want to let it tumble downstream and watch for your line to twitch, which means you got a fish.
Hey, Joe.
Hey.
And your answer will now be on camera, so we'll have it forever. Maybe you come back on another day and talk only about flies, because where did you get those flies?
Good question. I'd love to do that. I actually teach fly tying up at my school, at North Home School. Most of these, well, maybe half, probably half of these I tied and half of them I bought. I would love to tie all my own flies. It's a time constraint is the biggest limiting factor most of the time. If I'm going out to Montana, you know, I'll probably spend a week or two tying flies and have a bunch ready to go. But sometimes I just don't have that time, so then I'll buy the flies there. And as you can see, I mean, there's such a variety of different flies there. It's really a fun hobby.
All right, we'll have you back. You can show how to do that.
Perfect. Set up a vise right here. I'll tie some up. Okay, we should probably clean some fish. I've got my fillet knife. I've got a steel, which is just for honing. It's not necessarily like a whetstone or something where you'd have a really dull knife and you'd want to put a new edge on it. The honing steel just kind of you know, takes that very fine edge and tunes that fine edge. So the knife is sharp already, and then you just put a little bit of fine edge on there. And I might do that once or twice throughout the process here, just to make sure we stay nice and sharp.
Daddy?
So, hi Violet. So, let's take a look here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to start by cutting the fillet completely off the fish here. There's a lot of different ways you can clean a trout, and some people will just take the head off, take the guts out, and then smoke it, or throw the whole thing on a grill that way. That's a great way to do it. What I'll do today is I'll fillet the whole thing off, and I'll leave the skin on. Some of them, that's a great way to pan fry it or to grill it. And sometimes I'll fillet the skin off just like you would with a walleye or another fish, and then bread it and fry it. That's a popular method with my children. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to make a little cut right behind the gill, and then I make a cut that kind of opens up the belly here. And we can access all the insides, and we'll look at those in a sec. I'm just going to cut this all the way off, and I'm not sure that the audio picked that up, but what I'm doing is I'm just riding along the backbone, and I'm cutting through the ribs there to begin with, and keeping my blade all the way along the backbone. As long as I'm touching that backbone, I know I'm not wasting any meat. Especially with a small fish like this, that's really important to do.
So you're taking the ribs with you on that?
Taking the ribs with me on this one. The ribs are really fine in these fish. I have the crappie there, and I'll show you on that. I'm going to actually carve around the ribs, but on these I cut right through because it's actually a lot easier to do it that way. Let's see what we have inside. This was one of the river fish. We're going to see what we have in the stomach here. Oh yeah. Oh great. This is good stuff. I don't know how close you can get there. So at first glance, something like this looks like, and it is, a bunch of sticks, pine needles and things like that. And you might think, why would a trout be eating sticks and pine needles? This is actually a caddisfly casing. Caddisflies make a little house out of this stuff. See if I can get the bug out of here. There it is. Here we go. There's my caddisfly larvae. That's pretty neat. And I actually have some fly patterns that look just like this in my fly box there. And it's pretty telling as well, I think, to to have an animal like this that isn't fooled by that camouflage. It's smart enough to know that stick is actually the house of a caddisfly. That's pretty cool.
Also, just that it's worth eating the stick.
Worth eating the stick. Yes, I have literally cleaned trout from this stream that have little pebbles in their stomach, because the same thing, they'll have a bug, that's sort of attached to a pebble, and they'll just sort of indiscriminately gobble up the whole thing. This is a really big nymph here. Like this might be a stonefly nymph, or a damselfly nymph or something like that. But that whole thing is a bug right there. Insects like this live the vast majority of their life underwater, and it's not till they're an adult that we see them most of the time when they're flying around. But that part of their life cycle is very short.
We have caddisflies in our tanks every once in a while. We'll catch them and keep them for a summer.
Yeah. Yeah, and so are they in that nymph stage for the whole time?
Yeah.
Okay, so what I'm doing now is get this fish out of the way here. I just flipped it over, and then I'm going to cut the other fillet off the other side here. People do this different ways. I've had people shake their head at me for doing it this way. I always need to have the belly pointing at me. Some people always cut away from themselves this way. For some reason, I've always learned I have to cut this way when I just have the belly facing me. So there we go. That's that guy. We'll look at some more later. Okay, and I'm going to remove the ribs here. And then with a fish that's this small, I'm probably, well, it doesn't matter. I could do either. I could leave the skin on this one or fillet the skin off. Okay, so I've just kind of made that little cut under the ribs. They're very thin. They're very delicate bones in these fish here. And then I'm just going to pull that off.
So is this a size that you would normally keep, or is this...
It depends. Everything's relative, right? If I was in Montana, I wouldn't dream about keeping one this size. If I was steelhead fishing, steelhead are rainbow trout, but they're the ones that live in Lake Superior, so they get much bigger. Like 24 to 30 inches is pretty common with those, and this one is maybe 10 or 12 inches here. So yeah, I probably wouldn't keep a fish this size normally, but since they are, part of my consideration there too is that this is a stocked fish in a place where it can't reproduce, and so most of the time, if I'm hungry for fish, I'll keep it regardless of how big it is. So I think what I'll do is I'll go ahead and fillet the skin off this one, because I want to show you the skin, which is really interesting. And for this takes a little bit of practice, but I'm just gently keeping my knife a little pressure down on the skin. I don't want to have any meat left on there. A little bit of silver on the fillet itself means you were right on the money. And what's interesting about this, I'm going to save this. Fish have scales, but not all scales are the same. The scales on the crappie are vastly different than this, to the point where this is completely edible. You can put the whole piece of skin like in an air fryer and have a crispy little fish skin chip, or you can, when you grill it, you just leave the skin on and then eat the skin along with the meat itself, and that's fine too. It's got a lot of good healthy fats in it. But you wouldn't want to do that with a panfish unless you had scaled it first. The last step on a trout like this is to get the pin bones out. They have a little line of bones that's just up from the ribs, and so we're just going to make a little cut. Again, this would be for if I was frying this fish. So that's a bone-free piece. One interesting thing about pin bones, they're the same type of thing you would have like in a huge salmon fillet, and you can actually remove them without making that cut if they're big enough. You can just take a pliers and just pull them out, each one, so you have the fillet nice and whole. But with a fish this size, that's not going to happen. So again, I'll just fillet out the ribs. I like to just pull it off at the end there. My other uncle taught me that.
So is all the stuff you're doing here, would it be pretty much the same with a brook trout or lake trout or any of the others?
Yep, all those trout species are going to be real similar. But like I mentioned, there's a lot of different ways. You know, the anatomy is going to be the same, but there's a lot of different ways to approach it. So maybe on another one, I'll approach it for like, if I wanted to smoke it whole or something like that, I might do it slightly differently.
You'd still remove the bone if you were smoking it whole?
Not necessarily. Often if you just leave the whole thing intact, those bones, when you pull the backbone out, when it comes off the grill, they all come out together. And you've got basically you've got the skin and the bones, and then you've got the meat left over. So there's very little waste that way, which is nice as well. Let's maybe do one of those crappies so we can see the difference. These fish, I was mentioning this before the show started, the color changes so dramatically once they're taken out of their environment. This is closer to what it looked like, when I caught it, but leave it exposed to the air or the sun for a while and it changes quite a bit.
Same bait, same process for catching?
Actually, that's a great question, because this time of year is a really fun time of year to fish panfish on the fly rod. So I did catch these with a streamer and my fly rod last night. Most people would be throwing a bobber and a worm or something like that up into a weed line. But it's really fun to try to get them on a fly rod. And, water temp is key. So last night the water was like 67 degrees. It was pretty warm. The fish just weren't in where I was expecting them to be. But there were a couple. So what I'm going to do with this one is I made that same cut to start. Obviously the shape of that fish is completely different. You've got this big, wide fish here. And they've got a really hard rib bone. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to angle up. I'm going to try to stay on this side of the backbone, and I'm going to come out at the top. And then I'm going to do the same thing I did on the trout and stay right on that backbone so I'm not wasting any meat. But then I'm just going to cut back around down to my ribs. Looks like I'm cutting my thumb, but my thumb is on the other side of the ribs, so that's a really good way to do it. And once I've got, so right now it's loose everywhere around except the ribs. So now I can pick this up, and the pin bones on this fish are actually attached to the rib line right there. So I have to actually cut through them at this point. Just a small cut, you can hear them being cut. And then again, just trying to keep my knife tight onto those ribs so I'm not wasting any meat. And this guy comes off relatively bone-free. It's just that one little line of pin bones there. Ribs are still in place. After I cut off the other one, maybe we'll see if this one has anything in its stomach. Crappies, adult crappies anyway, are they're pretty opportunistic feeders, but they will, as an adult, mostly eat other fish, which makes them a what?
Predator.
Not a herbivore or a carnivore, but a pescivore.
Oh.
Pescivore.
Yeah.
All right, now that you've used the term, pescivore means that it eats its own species?
No, it means it eats fish.
Oh,
Like
Pescivore.
a pescatarian.
Yep.
ah,
Yep.
okay.
Or a Pisces.
Yep.
So if I were to eat fish, I'd be a customer.
If you were to only eat fish, I suppose, yeah. Okay.
Well, you're pretty close.
Yeah, that's right. All right. This one's got a pretty empty stomach, so it was hungry, I guess. On a bigger fish, it's really difficult on something this size, but on a bigger fish, it's kind of interesting to take a look at the other organs as well, like the heart and things like that. But this looks like mush, but I think this is the remains of a fish. Feel some bones in here. Yeah, we'll have to see if the other one has something a little more intact. Anything else we want to look at on there? I don't think so.
In an earlier show,
Mm-hmm.
the person paused to talk about the ladder that
Yeah.
the fish had so that it could easily float along in the water. Do you know what he's talking about?
Yeah, the swim bladder. And most people are familiar with that. Most fishermen are most familiar with that when you pull a fish out of deep water and you see that swim bladder come out of their mouth. They're unable to pressurize quickly enough. So as you pull them out of that deep water and the pressure gets less, that bladder comes out, and that's why they won't go back down the hole. You catch a small perch in 30 feet of water and it just swims around the top of your hole. What happens with the swim bladder in a fish like this is that's one of the first things that gets cut because it runs right up along above the internal organs and below the kidneys, just inside that rib cage. So you can't really see it when you fillet a fish this way. So.
And the only thing it would have in it is air.
Yep, exactly.
So also it would deflate, so to speak. It just wouldn't have any air.
Correct. Yep. Okay, so the same thing, I just dried that one off, and I wanted to just show you how different, I mean, look how rigid this is, right? Compared to this fish skin. These both have scales, but the scales, I mean, I've got one or two on my finger right here from the trout. They're literally just tiny little shiny scales, whereas a crappie scale here, here's a couple of crappie scales. They're getting to be, you know, close to the size of a dime almost on some of them here. So the skin is edible on this guy as well, but you would have to remove all of these scales before you did that. And that's a common way to eat panfish, to scale them, but it sure is messy. Okay, and then with this crappie fillet, same thing. I've just got this small line of pin bones, or I guess I often call them Y bones. A lot of people do, because in a northern pike they're actually in the shape of a Y. So I just kind of keep that same term for other fish too, but these ones are just straight little bones. Take a look at the color. Can you see these okay in the camera? The color of these is so interesting. Again, we have the fish that eats mostly other fish, and the fish that eats things like freshwater shrimp, you know, just like a flamingo getting its pink color from what it eats. It's real similar with this meat here. You can catch rainbow trout that are real pale meat, not quite this pale, but they look completely different than this, and that's because they just have a different diet. Some of that sure is species, you know, but a lot of it is diet.
Do you see a difference in the color of the meat of the rainbows you catch in the lake versus in the stream?
It'll be interesting to see. It's odd. I've never quite understood it, to be honest, but I will catch, you know, 2 lake trout up in Canada 10 minutes apart in the same body of water, and you clean them, and one is real pink and one is real pale. So I'm not exactly sure that it's all environment, right? Some of it is just what the fish eats, or like I said, the genetic makeup of that particular fish. It'll be interesting to see though if this one has different color. These are both stocked fish, and I have read that actually the trout food that they give them they put a dye in it so that the fish has the right color, you know, because oftentimes, you know, this fish probably only been in that river for a month. Otherwise, it was just farm raised, and then they released it into that river at the stream trout opener. So let's take a look at this one from the lake here.
So you mentioned that one wouldn't get an opportunity to reproduce in the wild.
Right.
They sterilize them before they release them? Is that...
Nope. It all has to do with habitat. There is, I believe there's some evidence that the brown trout they're putting in those rivers are reproducing. I guess I can't say for sure. The ones that are in the lake for sure can't reproduce. They need moving water, they need gravel, they need the right temperature, and they just don't have access to those things in a lake. The ones that are in the streams, you know, potentially have those things. And that's a lot of the surveys they do, the studies they do to see if, you know, if these are fish that are reproducing on their own, or if they're all stocked fish. I do think there's some evidence that the brown trout can reproduce. And of course, around here, there is one native trout species. Anybody know? There's only 2 native trouts in Minnesota.
Brooks?
Brook trout.
Lakes?
Lake trout, exactly. Brook trout and the lake trout are native.
Right. He's in.
And there's actually a hybrid. They're not native, but there's a hybrid of those 2 that they stock around here as well, called a splake.
Oh, yeah.
So obviously brook trout can reproduce in the streams around here. Boy, this one that came from the lake has absolutely nothing in its belly. So that's why it was going for that big rapala I was trolling along.
You say trolling, does that mean your boat was moving?
Yes.
What do you mean by trolling?
Good question. Yep. It's a really fun way to fish this time of year. And actually it's a little late. I shouldn't say this time of year. It was a really fun way to fish a month ago. Because it is it's very hands off. So I take my kids and we can, you know, throw a rapala out and putt around the lake and have snacks, and then time to reel in a fish, and that's always fun. So this one is quite a bit more pale. It's still got more of an orange color than the crappie, but it's a lot more pale. So again, with something like this guy, we'll just take the ribs off again, and maybe with this one I'll leave the skin on. My wife and I the other day went to a lake, and we each brought home a limit, so we had 10 trout, and I took half of them and filleted them like this, and half and filleted them like this. So I put 10 fillets on the grill and 10 fillets in the pan. I usually like to do a combo of that if I have the option. With a fish this small, again, I can feel these pin bones right here. Sometimes I won't even worry about them. I can grill this now and it would be just fine. But I'd be less likely to do that if I was serving it to kids. I'm going to get all the bones out. So, in this case, I have to make my cut without taking it all the way off. I'll just take this little strip out. And if I was at home, my cat would be begging, rubbing against my leg, waiting for me to drop this on the floor for the cat treat. Isn't that funny though? I have 2 cats. One of them couldn't care less. One of them just, let me outside, I'm going to go find my own food. And the other one, as soon as I'm cleaning fish, wants a treat. So there's that finished fillet, bone free, ready to go on the grill. A lot of times with something like this, I'll brine it for a day, throw it in a saltwater bath, and put it in the fridge for 24 hours, and then rinse it off and put some seasoning on it, some rosemary, put it on the grill.
You wouldn't put the black crappie on the grill, or would you? That'd be tricky.
People do. I don't usually do that. When you grill a fish, you almost have to keep the skin on if you're grilling it. And when you grill a fish that has all those scales on it, like I said, you either need to scale it or you or the scales all kind of curl up and you get this kind of unappetizing, weird, skin underneath your fish there. So yeah, you'd want to scale it. But I do know some people that grill walleyes and say it's fantastic. Same thing you'd want to do there, scale it first or just go for it and don't worry about the skin.
Joe, you obviously have a great fun with fishing, right? So what do you do during all the rest of your time? What's the job that you do that sometimes gets in the way?
Gets in the way of fishing? Yeah. Well, as of yesterday, I'm done with it again. This is, I just finished my 14th year as an art teacher up in North Home School. And you may have heard me mention that I teach fly tying up there. I teach a class called Outdoor Arts in which we do things like tying flies, but we also make duck decoys and spear decoys. We'll make canoe paddles and we'll make fishing rods, and we just have a really good time. So I do that 9 months out of the year. Here we go. This one's a female with a bunch of eggs.
This will be interesting then.
Mm-hmm.
We'll do a little anatomy check here and see the eggs.
Yeah. Get this fillet out of the way.
Cutting around the rib just like before.
Yep, back to the crappie here. So we're going to cut around the ribs. So these are this is called a skein. The eggs in a fish are in this little balloon called a skein, and the actual individual eggs are tiny, tiny. I mean, I don't know a number. There's thousands of eggs in any fish, and it would be interesting to juxtapose this with a trout egg, because they are completely different. When we steelhead fish, which again is a rainbow trout that lives in Superior and swims into the rivers to spawn in the spring, we'll use egg imitations, and they're like little glass beads. I don't think I have any along. I can talk about those when we do the fly fishing episode. But they're vastly different. Yeah, I don't have any in there. That's interesting to see. Fish like this, bluegills, crappies, rock bass, they make nests up in the pencil reeds. You can actually see them. You can see their little cleared out nest. They'll go into a sandy, silty area and kind of clean it out with their tail. So they create this little indentation, and that's where they will lay their eggs. And usually when it gets to be this time of year, what happens is the bigger females are moving out of their nest. They've laid their eggs, and if you're in that area fishing, you end up catching the smaller males that stay behind to kind of guard the nests. You'll see them just hovering right over the top of those nests, and you can sight fish them. Anything that drops into their area, they're going to attack. So, see if there's anything in this girl's belly. Nope, not much.
Pretty empty.
Pretty empty again.
Yep.
But the eggs are interesting.
You know, Ryan can help me remember. Last Thursday, this is Thursday, June 3rd. So last Thursday, there was a fellow, Dick Beardsley, who was flaying fish for us and showing us how he does it. And I'm pretty sure he went the exact opposite direction.
Start on the back?
On the crappie. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, he didn't have a crappie, he had a rock bass.
Yeah, the rock
Cut
bass,
down the
that's
back.
Same deal,
Yeah.
pretty much.
Yeah. Yeah, like
They're
I.
real similar. The knife appeared just after the rib cage and went to the tail, but then when it came time, we went back to the front of the fish to go around the bone.
Yeah.
So I suppose it's what you get used to, or maybe you find success in.
Absolutely, that's a really good point. I might clean with somebody that is equally fast and equally clean, but they do it completely differently. They'll, if they tried it my way, they wouldn't be able to do it, and I wouldn't be able to do it their way either. I have a friend actually that I fish with a couple times a year, and when we clean walleyes, every time we clean walleyes, I say, you got to show me how to do that again, because I just can't even figure out how he does it. Yeah, there's many different ways to do the same job. And some of it is like you said, some of it is things that I've learned from other people along the way. And some of it, a lot of it, I spent my childhood on a dock catching perch and bluegills, and then trial and error, clean a fish, and see if I can get this figured out. So it's been hundreds and hundreds of fish to get to this point. Should I clean one more trout? Or do you want me to?
I think you better.
Yeah? I mean, I have more. Keep it going?
Maybe one more we have time for.
Sure. Maybe I'll do on this one. I won't fillet it. I'll just show you how some people would like to grill or bake it, just by removing the head, taking the guts out, and that's a nice method. Like I mentioned, you can. It is a nice way to get probably the most meat out of your fish. And trout is such a delicate fish anyway. It's nice to do something like that with the meat instead of, like my brother says, he doesn't like to fry trout because it kind of overpowers the delicate meat flavor. A lot of people prefer to bake it or grill it. So with this, I cut the head off, and then I'm turn it this way, and then I just split all the way down. And now I'll cut. This is the anal fin. I'll just cut around that side of it, and then I'll do the same thing on the other side of it to get rid of the. It was a little much cutting backwards. To get rid of this fin completely. There's that. And we can just take this whole thing off. This, you can see the swim bladder a little bit better. This would be the swim bladder area right here.
Do they do with the rainbows around here where they'll like clip one of the fins for your group?
Yeah, that's a good question. They do that. Yes, they do. I don't know that they have done it lately with any of the fish they've released here. But this spring I was steelhead fishing on the North Shore, and the regulations there are you can keep 3 fish, which is awesome. They're big fish, but you can only keep it if it's a clipped fish. This is the adipose fin right here, and for a farm-raised fish, they'll cut this fin off and then release the fish. So when you catch a steelhead over there, if you're interested in keeping one, you have to look and see, does it have an adipose fin or is it clipped? And I believe I caught 8, and only one of them had a clipped fin. So I got to keep 1. There's something solid in here. Let's see what we got. Lee, were you here when we pulled the caddis flies out of the other one?
I wasn't. I was listening to this girl named Violet.
Interesting. There is I think I just cut that. That was a bigger nymph of some kind. This is all pretty mushy. That's a caddis. Kind of have that green color to them there. That's caddis. This, like I said, I have some flies in my box that that imitate these ones. Real common bug to find on the river. Yeah, this one either has all those things digested already, or wow, what is that? I don't know what that is. That's like it's like a big worm.
Meat or something?
Interesting. Yeah. Huh. I have caught of all the fish that I've cleaned, the most interesting things I've found. I cleaned a not very big northern pike one time, 24 inches maybe, that had a baby duck inside it. Yeah, which was quite interesting. And then I've cleaned several rainbow trout that I've caught in the winter that have frogs in their bellies, which was surprising until I read about, you know, how frogs, when they're in that kind of state that they're in the winter, they'll just sort of creep along the bottom of a lake, you know, and just kind of exist for a few months underwater. So this, at this point, what I would normally do is I would take this over to the sink, and these are the kidneys actually that run along the back there. You can just take the kidneys, pull those all out, and then same thing, I would rinse this off. I would probably brine this for a day. And then this is great to just throw on the grill just like this. The skin peels right off. Like I said, if you grab, when it's done, if you grab right here at the backbone, you can kind of pull all the bones out in one go, which is really a kind of a nice way to do it. Yeah.
All right. Joe, thanks for being here today.
Absolutely.
I appreciate you doing the show. I heard the promise. He's coming back. He's going to actually show us how to make those flies that he's got over there. Maybe that'll be towards the end of the summer or something. We'll wait to do that one. So, thanks a lot for being on our show today.
Want to shake hands?
Sure, you bet. I'll pass that one up.